The space race was a major milestone in the 20th century that sparked major technological advancements, while the US competed for dominance against the Soviets in humanity's final frontier.
In the mid-1950s, the Cold War was impacting everyday lives in both countries, fueled by the arms race and the growing threat of nuclear weapons, threatened by espionage back and forth in both countries, with war continuing in both US and Soviet media.
These tensions would continue throughout the space race, on top of events such as the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 and the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Fueled by a desire for both countries to demonstrate their technological and political advantages, the space race began.
The space race sparked a new generation of advanced satellite technology, and the competition led both nations to create valuable systems that we even utilize today. Satellites are used nowadays in various ways, such as communication, weather forecasting, and conducting LiDAR surveys.
Additionally, both nations saw the development of satellites as vital to national security. With satellites, the superpowers can now detect enemy missiles and improve their defenses against them.
The space race, beginning with the launch of Sputnik 1, will last over a decade all the way until 1969.
Sputnik 1 launched on November 3, 1957, becoming the first man-made object to ever go into space. And not long after, Laika became the first dog to go into space, a huge feat for the Soviets.
On January 31st, 1958, the US finally responded by sending its first satellite, Explorer 1, into space. Although it made international headlines, its success was largely diminished by the major successes of the Soviets.
Concerned by the astonishing feats of the Soviet space program, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act just a few months later. It marked the birth of NASA.
Nonetheless, the Soviets once again proved to the world their ability to dominate space, sending Luna 1 over the surface of the moon on January 2, 1959, and not long before Yuri Gagarin became the first person to go into space with his 1 hour 48-minute flight aboard Vostok 1 on April 12, 1961.
The US needed to step up its game, so in 1961, President John F. Kennedy gave his famous inaugural address regarding the space race with his famous words.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
He committed the nation to the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and so the race to the moon began.
The Soviets yet again put a man in space, just a few months after Vostok 1. This time it is German Todorov, the backup pilot of Vostok 1, aboard Vostok 2, staying over a day in space. He became a test subject for Soviet scientists to study the long-term effects of space.
The US, severely lagging behind the Soviets in space infrastructure, finally launched the Mercury Atlas 6 with John Glenn aboard. This shuttle put the first American man into space, but almost a year after the Soviets did.
The Soviets sent the first woman into space too, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963, a feat that the US would not achieve for another 2 decades.
On October 22, 1966, Luna 12 launched off Earth to reveal the first pictures of the far side of the moon. The Soviets are so far ahead, it seems doomed for the Americans, but it's only going to get worse. Great victories come with great losses.
The tragic fire aboard the command module of Apollo 1 killed 3 American astronauts. The entire world watched Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee die even before getting off the launch pad.
Both nations mourned for their lost astronauts, but the space race was not over.
As 1968 was coming to a close, the US pulled its last strength together and launched Apollo 8. This was a huge success for the US, as they were able to map the moon, which is extremely helpful to the Apollo 11 mission.
Apollo 11, the entire nation was tuned in. This would either be the brutal failure of the US in fulfilling Kennedy's promise, or it would show the world what Americans were capable of.
On July 20th, 1969, the entire nation heard Armstrong's famous words.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This was it. The US had officially won the space race and made Kennedy proud, who made the promise almost a decade earlier.
The US continued the Apollo missions, with 6 missions between the moon landing of 1969 and 1972, aimed at taking surveys of the moon's surface and bringing back specimens for the US scientists to study.
In 1975, as a symbol of cooperation between the two superpowers, A joint mission called the Apollo-Soyuz mission between the USA and the Soviet Union was launched. On July 17, an Apollo shuttle docked with the Soyuz shuttle, and the crews greeted each other. Some people see this as the true symbolic end to the space race.
To this day, some conspiracists point out to various inconsistencies in the official NASA footage and argue that the United States faked the moon landing in order to win the space race and gain a propaganda victory over the Soviet Union.
There are several reasons why this theory is not true. An overwhelming amount of evidence that the moon landing actually did occur, such as photographs, video footage, and physical samples of moon rock that were brought to the Earth by Apollo astronauts.
In addition, the Soviet Union is closely monitoring the moon landing, and if they had detected any evidence of a staged landing, they would have used it to discredit the US already.
Finally, the idea that such a large-scale operation involving thousands of people could be kept a secret for decades is highly unlikely. The moon landing was indeed real.
Although the space race had officially ended with the moon landing, its legacy continues to impact people around the world. The competition had spurred significant advances in space exploration and technology, and it had demonstrated the power of national spirit.
It also had broader geopolitical implications. It was a competition between two superpowers that reflected the tensions of the Cold War. This had effects on international relations and national security, as both sides tried to prove to the world who's the stronger superpower.
In addition to diplomacy, the race also had a major effect on modern technology. The development of satellites, rocket propulsion systems, and material sciences have had far-reaching impacts on various industries around the world. The competition had also demonstrated the power of technological innovation and the potential of humanity, inspiring generations of scientists and engineers to push the boundaries of what is possible.
The space race's legacy continues today, with humanity plodding back toward the moon with the Artemis missions, further into the solar system with a colony on Mars, and maybe even further one day. It's the space race that fundamentally empowers us to take a bigger leap than we ever did before.
Thanks to the History.com editors, the rmg.co.uk editors, Maddie Davis from the Miller Center, Bob Allen and Kelly Mars from NASA, Adam Munn from Space.com, and NASA Video and NTD from YouTube. And thanks to you for watching.